He was one of the funniest men I've ever known. In a tense diplomatic situation with a challenging meeting, he could break the ice, he could make everybody crack up.
Right after Lindsey's death, the quiet Capitol Hill street became the center of a growing mystery.
It's an incredible loss for the Senate, and for me personally, it's an incredible loss because I've lost one of my dearest friends in the United States Senate. He just was an incredible human being.
The door had been deadbolted from the inside, forcing paramedics to wait while police broke their way in. By the next morning, FBI agents were seen entering and leaving the home, carrying evidence containers as cameras rolled. One item in particular drew everyone's attention, leaving the nation wondering what investigators had discovered behind that locked door. The men at the door. On the morning of Sunday, July 12, 2026, the neighbors on that quiet street behind the Capitol woke up to something none of them had ever seen before. There were at least 6 men and 2 women standing outside the row house, and every single one of them was wearing FBI gear. A United States Marshal Service officer was there with them. At one point, a photographer caught an agent reaching into a large black container that had been set out on the property and lifting a manila folder from inside it. Consider how that looked to the rest of us. A sitting United States Senator dies at home on a Saturday night of what his own office described only as a brief and sudden illness. And by Sunday morning, federal agents are carrying folders out of his house in broad daylight. The FBI does not normally turn up when somebody dies of natural causes. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is simply accurate. And every reporter standing on that street already knew it. FBI Director Kash Patel posted that the Bureau was assisting local authorities and had made every necessary resource available. And then he declined to say anything further. Metropolitan Police Department Chief Jeffrey Carroll confirmed that his own department was leading the death investigation and that the FBI was only providing resources. No agency indicated foul play. Nobody said that a crime had been committed anywhere. The reason those agents were standing on that porch had already been written down that same morning, in an office across town, on a form belonging to the Chief Medical Examiner of the District of Columbia. It carried a name that most people could not even pronounce. 23 minutes past 10. Shortly after 8 o'clock on that Saturday evening, District of Columbia Fire and Emergency Medical Services were dispatched to the row house for a report of chest pains. Scanner audio, later reviewed by NBC News, The Washington Post, and Fox News Digital, captured what happened next in real time. The call itself, according to the Wall Street Journal, was placed by a woman who has never been publicly identified and who was not even at the residence when she made it. Somebody, somewhere else, knew that something was badly wrong inside that house before the people on that street did. Responders arrived and found the door deadbolted. They requested police assistance to force entry. Roughly 25 minutes later, at around 10 minutes to 9, the audio indicates that CPR was already underway. He was pronounced dead at George Washington University Hospital at 23 minutes past 10 that night, according to a joint statement from the Metropolitan Police Department and the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. He was 71 years old. The preliminary finding was aortic dissection due to arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Francisco Diaz, was careful to note that the death certificate would remain pending until all toxicological and microscopic testing was finalized. That caveat matters, and anybody telling you the case is closed, or that the case is suspicious, is running ahead of the evidence in both directions. An aortic dissection is a tear in the inner wall of the body's largest artery, and blood forces its way between the layers of the vessel until the whole structure gives way. The reason it kills so quickly is brutal in its simplicity. In the Oxford Vascular Study, nearly half of the people who suffered the most dangerous form of it died before they ever reached a hospital assessment. Emergency surgery has to happen within a couple of hours. The condition strikes roughly 3 to 4 people in every 100,000 each year, and about 3/4 of those cases occur in patients between 50 and 65. Uncontrolled high blood pressure is the single biggest treatable risk factor, contributing an estimated 54% of the population attributable risk. Graham was an older man with documented hardening of the arteries. His own father had died of a heart attack, and President Trump pointed to exactly that family history when he spoke about it afterward, saying on Newsmax that a part of Graham's body had literally blown up. His profile fit the disease almost perfectly. But the reason his aorta tore open on that particular Saturday night may well have started 48 hours earlier and 4,000 miles away from that porch. The last flight home. He had spent his 71st birthday on July 9th in transit, coming out of a NATO summit in Ankara. Senator Dick Durbin, who traveled with him that week, said Graham was sitting down with every person possible to share his thoughts on how to end the war in Ukraine, and called that so typical of Lindsey. By Friday, July 10th, he was standing in Kyiv. He met President Volodymyr Zelensky inside the presidential office, alongside Congressman Michael McCaul. He toured a Ukrainian drone production facility. He announced that he had reached a bipartisan agreement with the White House on a revised Russia sanctions package, the thing he had been chasing for years. Standing near wrecked Russian equipment, he told reporters that they had the formula to end this war, and that the answer was to help Ukraine be more lethal. It was his 10th trip into that war zone since the invasion began. When Zelensky asked how he was doing, Graham smiled and gave him an answer that reads very differently now than it did that afternoon. He said he was older, but no wiser. He flew home on Saturday. President Trump later said he spoke with him around 7 o'clock that evening and recalled that Graham told him he was a little tired, that it was a long trip, many hours, and that he had only just gotten back. Trump would say afterward that it could have been his last call. Axios reported a single account, never independently confirmed by anybody else, that Graham felt unwell that night and intended to get himself checked out after his Sunday television appearance, and that he joked he could not die yet because he still needed to finish the Russia sanctions, sort out Iran, and get Israeli and Saudi normalization done. One outlet, one anonymous source, weigh it accordingly. Roughly 90 minutes after that phone call with the president, the ambulance was dispatched. Cardiac specialists who spoke publicly afterward kept circling the same point without ever claiming to know his private medical file. A stressful meeting, in a person whose blood pressure is already elevated, is precisely the kind of trigger that tears an aorta open, and it happens with almost no warning at all. Which brings us right back to that house, and to what those agents did not find inside it. The house that was never a mansion. You may have read that Lindsey Graham owned a 5,000 square foot mansion worth $1 million. That figure came from a real estate blog, and county records flatly contradict it. According to Oconee County property records, Graham bought a modest 3-bedroom home in Seneca, South Carolina, for $164,000 in 1993. Forbes described it as a ranch of roughly 1,900 square feet, built in 1989. He never moved for over 30 years. While he became one of the most powerful voices in American foreign policy, he went home to the same small house he bought before most of his colleagues had ever heard his name. His Washington residence, the one with the FBI agents standing outside it, was a townhouse valued at around $890,000. His estimated net worth was about $1.5 million, which ranked him 295th out of 535 members of Congress. For comparison, the wealthiest member of that body was estimated to be worth more than $664 million. His Senate salary was $174,000 a year, and almost everything he held was in mutual funds and bonds rather than individual stocks, which is quietly remarkable, because it meant that the man who sat in the intelligence briefings had arranged his own money so that nobody could ever accuse him of trading on them. To understand why a man who could move American foreign policy with a single phone call ended up owning so little, you have to go back to the one room where he first learned exactly what having nothing feels like. One room behind the bar, He was born in central South Carolina, a small mill town about 5 miles outside Clemson. His parents, Florence James Graham, whom everybody called Dude, and his mother Millie, ran a place called the Sanitary Cafe. It was a bar, a restaurant, a pool hall, and a liquor store all at once, and it served the men coming off shift at the textile mills. There was a pinball machine, a jukebox, and a rocking chair down at the end of the bar where Millie sat. The family of 4 lived in one room behind the business. Darlene described it years later, and her words are worth reading slowly. She said it was one room, where they all slept, where they all ate, where they watched television, and that the sofa and everything else they owned was in that same room. They cooked in the bar's kitchen. They shared a bathroom with the customers. Politico reported that young Lindsey bathed in water warmed on the stove. Later on, they moved into a trailer. By the time he was 12, he was racking pool tables to help the family out, and the regulars gave him the nickname Stinkball. His mother, Millie, was diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma and died at the age of 52, while he was still a college student. Roughly 15 months later, his father, who had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, died of a heart attack. Graham was 21 years old and about to start law school. His sister Darlene was 13. She remembered standing in the living room of that house on the day their father died, absolutely scared to death, with no idea what was going to happen to her. And what her brother did over the following weeks is the thing he spent the next 50 years of public life quietly refusing to make a speech about. The bargain. He became her legal guardian at 22, and then he climbed. He was the first person in his family ever to attend college. He went through the University of South Carolina and then its law school. He served as a lawyer in the Air Force and stayed in the reserve for decades, retiring as a colonel in 2015. He won a seat in the State House in 1992, went to Congress in the Republican wave of 1994, served as an impeachment manager against Bill Clinton, and in 2002 he took the Senate seat that had belonged to Strom Thurmond. In Washington, he found the 2 men who defined him. With John McCain and Joe Lieberman, he formed the trio that General David Petraeus nicknamed the Three Amigos, and the 3 of them turned up in Bosnia, in Baghdad, in Kabul, anywhere American troops were deployed. Petraeus said no group had the backs of the men and women in uniform more than they did. When McCain died in August of 2018, Graham wept on the Senate floor and said that his friend had failed a lot, but he never quit. Lieberman died in 2024. Graham was the last one standing. And this is where the story turns strange enough that people still argue about it today. In 2015 and 2016, Graham called Donald Trump a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He warned that if the party nominated him, they would get destroyed, and that they would deserve it. He compared Trump winning the nomination to being shot in the head. When Trump read his cell number out at a rally, Graham filmed himself destroying flip phones with a meat cleaver and a blender, and the country laughed along with him. Then he became Trump's golf partner and his most reliable defender in the United States Senate. Trump marveled at it publicly in 2018, saying that Lindsey used to be a great enemy of his and had somehow become a great friend, and asking the crowd if they could believe it. After January 6th, he stood on the Senate floor and said that he and Trump had been on a hell of a journey, that he hated it to end this way, and that they could count him out because enough was enough. Within weeks, he was back on the course at Mar-a-Lago. Petraeus offered the most concrete explanation anybody has on the record, saying that Graham told him he wanted to continue influencing American foreign policy, and that to do that, he needed to make concessions on domestic politics. Graham framed it differently, saying the best way he could honor John McCain was to help his country. Anne Applebaum was less generous, writing in The Atlantic that his motivations remained a mystery, that perhaps he craved proximity to power, perhaps he feared losing his seat and any claim to relevance, but that deep down, he must have known he was betraying the ideals of his younger self. That bargain is what everybody decided he was carrying. It is what they assumed those agents had gone looking for. And every last one of them was searching in the wrong building, because the real answer was never in Washington at all. What they actually found. He did not simply become Darlene's guardian when their parents died. He legally adopted his own 13-year-old sister so that she could qualify for his military benefits. Social Security survivor checks kept the two of them afloat. He taught her how to spell her name the way she still spells it today. He never married. He never had children. When people asked him about it, and they asked him constantly and often cruelly, he deflected with a joke and moved on, saying only that there was nothing wrong with not being married and that he did not consider himself a defective person by any means. He once said the right girl was smart enough not to have time for him. On July 13th, Governor Henry McMaster stood at the State House in Columbia and appointed Darlene Graham Nordone to her late brother's seat. He said that Lindsey took care of his little sister in years long departed, and that it was his honor to ask that little sister to finish his work for him now. McMaster revealed the two of them had spoken in the small hours of Sunday morning. Trump endorsed her on Truth Social, calling it a fabulous tribute to a man who loved her dearly. On July 14th, she was sworn in on the Senate floor, becoming the first woman ever to represent South Carolina in the United States Senate. She had never held elected office in her life. She had spent her career running the State Commission for the Blind. Standing there, she said that Lindsey had always been there for her, and that now she would be there for him. Then, she spoke to her brother directly, and said she missed him more than she could put into words, but that she was going to do this, and that she had got it. The attack started the very next day. On The View, Joy Behar called the appointment the very definition of a DEI hire. And Sonny Hostin agreed, saying it was everything the Republican Party stands against, calling it DEI and nepotism thrown together, and dismissing her as a certified optician. Her own co-hosts pushed back, pointing out this was a caretaker appointment and that relatives filling seats is a bipartisan American tradition going back decades. Nikki Haley, who was elected governor of that same state 16 years ago, answered with a single dry line about how they had already taken care of that particular question. The special primary is set for August 11th. Nancy Mace, Ralph Norman, and Russell Fry are all circling the seat. And on the same day his sister took the oath, the sanctions bill Graham finalized in Kiev was formally unveiled, with Richard Blumenthal recalling their final phone call when Graham told him this was a big deal and that they had all done good. So here is what those agents actually found inside that house on Capitol Hill. They found a folder. They found some containers. They found the ordinary belongings of a man who bought a small ranch house in 1993 and never once traded up. The reason they never found the secret is that it had walked out of that story 50 years earlier and grown all the way up. What Lindsey Graham hid was never paper, and it was never a crime. It was a promise he made to a terrified 13-year-old girl in a living room in central South Carolina, back when he was barely old enough to sign the adoption papers himself. He kept that promise every single day, until the night his heart tore open in a townhouse 400 miles from home. And 3 days after he died, that promise walked onto the floor of the United States Senate, raised her right hand, and told him she had got it. So after all of that, what do you honestly think he was protecting all those years? And do you believe he got the bargain right in the end? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below.